which I appreciate that you did that, Brandon, so thank you. We're going to talk about, over, 2 months or so, it's pretty much, we're going to do this the duration of the Fundamentals series that we started this morning. We're just going to do these series concurrently. The names of God, as we go through on Sunday morning, sort of the fundamentals of the faith. We're going to be going through different names of God on Sunday evenings over the summer months. I have several goals in mind as we think about this. We have probably 8 or 9 lessons. One is to broaden our appreciation of God, right? There's a lot of information about God in the Old Testament. One of the primary benefits to studying the Old Testament, especially in today's culture where we don't grow up learning the Old Testament, one of the primary benefits is learning more about God's character. So as we understand his character and his nature, to consider how these names and titles inform his work. Most of these titles are really descriptors. We're going to go through several of them again that are they're not really names at all. They're job descriptions, things that he does. And that informs his work not just in the Old Testament and the New Testament as we read about these things, but informs his work in our lives. And ultimately, I want to hopefully get us to realize how we should embody some of these attributes. We obviously can't embody all of them. Some of them are uniquely suited to God and him alone. But a lot of these characteristics, if we're called to be holy as God is holy, we're made in his image and in some ways are conformed to him as his image through the Holy Spirit. How to embody some of these descriptions and titles in our own lives as we continue his work here on earth. So I had this morning, we're doing Fundamentals of the Faith, which is a very basic series, basic information. It's good, it's important, and I feel like we need to do it every few years. This series tonight and going forward on Sunday nights is going to be a bit more technical, a bit more of a deeper dive into some of the linguistics, some of the way the Hebrews thought about things, some of the ways that God has talked about in the New Testament in contrast to some of the other gods. So I've elected to do it on Sunday evenings because Sunday evenings I typically do more technical stuff. So that's what we're doing tonight, especially on God's names in the Old Testament. This study will warrant a bit of a deeper dive into the nuance of the Hebrew, especially. There is a fine line to walk between names and titles. When God is asked for his name, he only gives one response. We'll talk about that next week. It's the base of many of the other titles, though. El Shaddai, or Yahweh Yireh, or I don't know, they're blanking now. I just had this whole list in my office. But they are the Lord who does X, Y, or Z, a lot of the titles, or God who does X, Y, or Z. So a lot of his titles are compounded. They're compounded with either Yahweh or El. And as we go through this series, we're going to begin with those two words because many of the things God is called are more descriptions or aspects of his character. And so we're going to begin with a word that is not really a name or a title, and we use it as a name, and the writers of the Bible use it as a name, but technically, and we'll see this in how it's used, this is more of a race or a kind of being. This word El or Elohim, which is by far the most common designation or title or name in the whole Bible. It's worth considering it in detail at the outset because it is so common. Every culture and language has many different words. We are the same way for all kinds of non-human supernatural entities. Most cultures, historically speaking, and including ours, have a sliding scale of power, like how powerful are these entities? What can they do? How similar are they to humans? Are they good? Are they evil? And the peoples of the Bible are no different. We read in the Bible, we think angels and demons and devils, and there's no jinns in the Bible, but cultures in various parts of the world have this idea of a jinn. There is a biblical analog. Spirits, ghosts, right? We have these sort of descriptions or titles or words that we use to describe beings that are not human, beings that are not entirely physical, but have some amount of power. And the Bible is this way too. Angels, demons, devils, they exist. They have power. They have ability to influence the world. They are not human. And so when we think about this word El or Elohim that we're going to talk about tonight, the Bible authors do not go deep into the technicalities of what kind of supernatural entities may or may not exist. In our culture, we use the word God, not entirely, but in serious discussion, we use the word God for beings with creative power. Even when we're talking about entities that we don't think are real. Zeus, Hermes, think about, Shiva is more of a modern deity. There's a lot of deities, Odin. We call those beings gods. In this room, we understand they're not real, but it's the kind of being that has a certain kind of power. And when we're talking about various kinds of, again, supernatural entities, when we think about a being that has the kind of power to bring into existence new kinds of material, we use the word God. That is how that word is used throughout the Bible in a lot of context to describe a certain kind of being that has this level of power. And in the Old Testament, it would be Baal, it would be Ashtoreth, it would be Molech, it would be Chemosh, it would be, whoever you want to put in there. This word is used to describe them because humans need a word. We need a word for the thing that we know exists. We talked about it this morning. We know there's a creator. We know there are entities that are beyond us. We know that there are entities that have some amount of power over our lives. And of course, Romans talked about it. Paul talked about it in Romans. The divine nature and his divine attributes can be seen in what has been made. We know that there's something greater out there, and we need a word for it. And in the Old Testament, that word is El or Elohim. In the New Testament, that word is Theos or Theon. And in English, it's God. We use that as the word that we use. And so when we think about El or Elohim in the Old Testament, this is a word that is used of the one true God, but also of other entities and beings, in the same way that we use this word today, God, to describe the one God that we know is real, but also a whole host of other beings that we know probably aren't real, or entities that we know aren't real, but we still have to have a word to describe them. So there are several variations in the Old Testament of this word. The most basic is El, which simply means God, and this is why you see so many Hebrew names end in El. Ezekiel, Daniel, Samuel, right? These names that end in El, they do that because of God. They have God in their name. God strengthens, or God exists, or whatever you want to put in there. Hebrews named their people things that actually are words. We don't do that as much. English speakers, we don't. We don't name our children like actual words. And when a celebrity does that, we kind of make fun of them. Who was it that named their kid Apple? I can't remember that. There was a celebrity, It was Elon. Elon who named his kid Apple. And we all kind of make fun of them for that. But that's how most societies in history have named their children. Their names meant stuff. Like it was actual words. So the Hebrews are no different. When you think about Ezekiel, the Lord strengthens. You're calling him, or God, it would really be God strengthens. God strengthens. That's his name. His name is God strengthens. And they smushed it together to form a name kind of version of that. Elohe is a unique variation of this. God, El, the God Elohe of Israel. This only occurs a couple of times. It's only in this phrase. Elah is a standard variation, appears numerous times, not only in reference to the God of Israel, but other gods of other cultures. Elohim is the most important variant, which is a standard plural. El to Elohim. This is a general rule of Hebrew. You don't care, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The I am suffix of Hebrew denotes plural. Like we put an S on the end of words. When you think cherub versus cherubim, cherubim is plural. There's more than one cherub. That's how Hebrew does the plural, is I am. So when you see a word with the I am, seraphim versus seraph. Seraph is singular, seraphim is plural. El or Elohim. Elohim is the plural, right? And that is an important distinction because the writers of the Old Testament very frequently use this plural version in context mixed with singular pronouns when describing God. Numbers 15:40. You shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy to the Lord your God. I, singular pronoun I, am the Lord your Elohim, plural pronoun, or plural noun, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your, again, plural noun. I am the Lord your God. This is a cause of much consternation throughout literature on the Old Testament. The singular pronouns paired with the plural Elohim. This happens all throughout the Bible. It is super common. Now, God also uses the word El to describe himself, the singular God. But there is a significance to the fact that God consistently uses the plural noun to describe himself. Of course, this might be why For example, in 1 Samuel 4:7, the Philistines, they steal the ark. The ark comes into the land of the Philistines, and of course the ark God begins to send all sorts of plagues on the Philistines because they've stolen the Ark of the Covenant, and in fact one of the gods falls over, and then he falls over and his head's gone, the idols in the temple in Philistia. And so the Philistines say what? Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Well, the Israelites never really talked about having more than one God. It seems unusual that the Philistines would have this idea that there's more than one God in Israel, except that God keeps using the plural noun for himself. And so I don't think it's a surprise that the Philistines then get this idea that there's more than one God in Israel because God keeps using that plural pronoun. Now, it's easy to over and underthink it. I said we're going to be a little more technical. And I think there's a very obvious explanation for this. This is probably the most common explanation, in that God is already in the Old Testament giving a hint, giving a peek behind the curtain of his unusual and unique nature as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, who is one, we read Deuteronomy 6, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, who nevertheless appears in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, not just in the New Testament, but throughout the Bible. And so God, I think, is giving us a hint of this sort of triune nature that he possesses when he pairs a singular pronoun, I, me, my, with the plural noun, God, Elohim, which if in a strict translation would be, I am the Lord your gods. But of course, God thinks about himself in this plural and singular sense, where he is one God, there is one God over Israel, but there is the Father, the Son, and the Spirit even in the Old Testament. We have the angel of the Lord, we have the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the deep, we have Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. Well, you and I are not made in the image of angels, we'll talk about that later on. We're made in the image of God. So what's with the us there? Let us make man in our image. And so this word is, they've got the weird plural singular mix, but it's also used of entities that are not actually the one true God, like we use God to describe Zeus or Shiva or whoever, but we know they don't actually exist, except God uses this word in the Bible to describe entities that are not him, but nevertheless seemingly actually exist. We'll see a couple of these. Psalm 82, which is a contentious passage, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on it. God has taken his place in the divine council, and in the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked, give justice to the weak and fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and needy, and deliver them from the hand of the wicked? You have a couple of different ways to go. His condemnation of them, you're not judging justly, you're giving partiality, is something he would say to a being that actually exists. Right? This is an entity. This is not like you're fake and you're not real. Right? That would be a different judgment altogether. But he's saying what? In the midst of the gods he holds judgment. You other Elohim are not behaving the way that you should. Some people think this refers to leaders of Israel, which maybe it does, but it would be significant that he's using the word Elohim for that, to describe the leaders of his people, when very possibly we know there are angels that exist, that God has given dominion over certain parts of creation. In Daniel, when Michael appears to Daniel, I am the prince of your people, but the prince of Persia, he's fighting against me. And Michael says, I got to go fight him again. So I'll be back. I got to go fight the prince of Persia. Not the human prince, but this angelic entity that exists. There are supernatural entities that have power who are nonetheless not the one true God. They have some measure of power. We think about the angel of death in the plagues, who is able to effect such dramatic, devastating consequence in Egypt. He had power, but nevertheless he was not God, the one true God. So there are kinds of beings that this word is used to describe that are not him, not the one true God, but this word again is a word that denotes a certain kind of power over physical reality. Psalm 8:4. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? You have made him a little lower than, and the ESV has heavenly beings, but this is the word Elohim. You have made him a little lower than the gods and have crowned him with glory and honor. We know certainly this isn't talking about the leaders in Israel here, because he's talking about how men are not like this. Men, humans, are not like these heavenly beings, these Elohim. And so there is an important thing to note. You can get a little bit too down the rabbit hole, and I'm trying to not go too far down the technical rabbit hole of Elohim. But this is also a great cause of consternation, that God uses this word, God, to describe beings that are not him, but who do seemingly actually exist, which is why he is the great king above all gods. He is the God of gods. Our one true God, Yahweh, he is a being like these others that have supernatural power over reality, but he has the most power. And he has power not just over humans, but over these other supernatural entities to do with what he will. So one of the major through lines of God's revealing, that is the Bible, is the supremacy of one El, one God, among all the other entities that people call Elohim. There is only one. Exodus 12:12, I will pass through the land of Egypt at night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. Did the gods of Egypt actually exist? I don't know. Were they some sort of supernatural entity like demons or spirits? I don't know. But what is Yahweh saying? I'm going to execute judgment on them too. Not just the people of Egypt, but on their gods I will execute judgment. He says it in Numbers 33:3, on the day after the Passover, the people of Israel went out triumphantly in the sight of all the Egyptians, while the Egyptians were burying their firstborn whom the Lord had struck down among them. On their gods also the Lord executed judgments. The Egyptians were clearly judged. That's the death of the firstborn. But also, that word also is, I think, significant in that God is making a distinction between the judgment he rendered to the Egyptians and the judgment he rendered to the gods of the Egyptians, that he executed judgment upon. Which is why he says, Deuteronomy 10:17, the Lord your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. There are other entities that exist that peoples throughout history have called gods. But Yahweh's point is, I'm above them. I have more power than them. I judge them. These other entities that exist, I am the thing that they would call God, because there is only one who is the most powerful. 1 Corinthians 8:4-6, when Paul's writing, therefore to the eating of food and offering of idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, and there is no God but one. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and through whom we exist, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. That phrase, there may be, we certainly know there are supernatural entities that are not the one God, and people have called them God throughout history. But Paul says what? For us, for the Christian, for those who know the one true God, there is but one. These other entities, these so-called gods that exist, they are not worthy of the title. They are not worthy of the name. They're not worthy of that designation as God, because there is one. And what is the differentiation? For whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. That is, there's only one creator entity, and there's only one entity that sustains and upholds the universe. Hebrew writer says he upholds the universe by the word of his power. These other entities exist, but they do not sustain reality like the one true God. And they do not impose their will on reality like the one true God. There is only one creator. Although there are many so-called gods, they are not worthy of that designation. And so the writers of the New Testament simplify things quite a bit. They employ the normal, singular, and plural when discussing gods and gods. No more of this weird Elohim, plural nonsense. The writers of the New Testament simplify things down to the singular theos. For describing God, he is just a single God, and they use the plural when they describe other entities. It's a much more simple thing. Galatians 4:8-11. Formerly, when you did not know God, that is the singular theon, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not gods. This is the plural here. But now that you have come to know God, or rather be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world? That phrase, elementary principles, is used a number of times in Paul's writings to describe some sort of primal forces of reality. Could be human forces, but also used to describe non-human supernatural forces, these weak and worthless elementary principles, things that have influence or things that have power over the world, but are ultimately weak and worthless because you were enslaved to those who by nature are not gods. They claim to be gods. People think they're gods. People think they have that kind of power, but there is only one who has that kind of power. Why are you going back to those weak and worthless things? You observe days and months and seasons and years, and I'm afraid that I've labored over you in vain. You came to know God, or rather you came to be known by God. Don't go back again to those weak and worthless other forces. And so those that by nature are not gods, in other places in the New Testament, he certainly refers to supernatural entities. We do not wrestle, Ephesians 6:12, against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and authorities and the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, who he would call those that by nature are not gods. They are cosmically powerful. They have authority over this present darkness. They are spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, but they are by nature not gods, because we know that there is one who is worthy of that designation. There are plenty of supernatural entities who want us to deny God's rightful position, to elevate them to the position of supreme deity, and they don't even need our loyalty. These supernatural forces of evil in the heavenly places, they don't need our loyalty. They just need to diminish God's status in our hearts and minds enough to divide our loyalties between them. They don't need you to worship them. They don't need you to love them. They just need you not to love God. They just need you not to love him with all your heart. And thus, the basic emphasis of the word God in both the Old and the New Testaments is that there is only one God worth worshiping. Deuteronomy 32:15. Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. He forsook God who made him. He scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him, that is God, to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. There is a perpetual tug of war in the hearts of every human. Very sad child back there. Between what we know to be true, that there is a God who is supreme, and again, that's Paul's point in Romans 1. We know there is a God who is supreme. What can be known about him is seen in what has been made, and yet we exchange the truth of God for a lie. The lie here, to sacrifice to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to stir him to jealousy with strange gods. In our context, we talked about this morning, we'll make the point again, not really sacrificing to Shiva or to Baal or to Odin or to Thor. Nobody's doing that. I shouldn't say nobody. Nobody here's doing that. And yet, we do elevate other things to his status. We elevate parts of our lives. We elevate people. We elevate ideas to the position that really only one entity should occupy, the top of the pyramid. The top of the pyramid being the Creator God who has made all things and who upholds all things. And we think that family will sustain us, or money, or my desires will sustain me, or politics will sustain me, or a particular relationship will sustain me, or maybe it's my job will sustain me. But you exist because one being is allowing you to exist. He is upholding your existence at this very moment. And we turn back to the elementary and worthless deities that are not really deities, that by nature are not gods. The new gods that have come recently. I wonder what that would be for us, the new gods that have come recently. Eventually probably going to be AI, guys, AI chatbots who are going to be elevated to that status. That's what people are trying to make. They're trying to make a new god. But there's only one. And we can either worship him or we can provoke him to jealousy. Romans 1:18 through 20, we've read it a bunch. We'll end with this. Romans 1:18 through 20. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature. This word, theotes, I don't know how to say that. This is a unique variation of this word. It is only applied ever to one entity. You can think about 2 Peter 1:3 through 4. We are become partakers of the divine nature. Acts 17:29, the divine nature is not something that is made by the art and imagination of man. There is only one entity that this word is used to describe, the Creator God, who we can see in the things that have been made in the creation of the world. So they, that is anyone who would suppress the truth, is without excuse. Because we know there is a Creator. But we suppress that knowledge. We exchange that knowledge. So though there are many beings with supernatural power, there is only one that can properly claim divinity. We'll talk about his proper name next week, but it's important to make this distinction as we begin this series on the names or titles of God. These titles or these descriptions flow from his unique status. His unique status as the only being really worthy of this word God. We use it because language is hard and we have to have common words for things, and so we use this word to describe all sorts of stuff. But we need to keep in mind there really is only one being that's worthy of that particular word. The word that means creator, who has the most power, who has all influence, all ability. It's one, God. As we offer the invitation, we know this is not a particularly evangelistic sermon, except that I know that you struggle with gods in your own life. Again, not Baal or Ashtoreth or whoever, but these gods that we've talked about tonight, to put them aside. Don't go back to them. The weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, forget those things. Those things are worthless. And come back to one true God who sustains you and upholds you and wants to, I like the way Paul says that. You have come to know God, or rather, to be known by God. He wants to know you as his child, as a part of his family. If you're ready, come.